Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode of me talking about stuff and things, I'm going to be going over episode 6 of Apocalypse. Before I continue, please check out the links in the description below. Now, at the beginning of the episode, Joe hears lions and roars into the night, and then we are at day 20. Waz and Teal have a discussion that seems to be similar to when they have a few episodes where they look at the lion prints near their shelter and talk about how it's very dangerous and the lions are very close. And they also find an unalive kudu that's a few days old, and they're talking about the animals are leaving, and they decide they want to migrate closer to the extraction point since they have food and energy, and they have about 20 miles before they reach civilization, so they really want to get rid of some of that distance as soon as possible. They make a plan how to migrate and pack up the stuff they want to take with them, and that night they talk about it being their last night in the shelter. Stephen Lee Hall Jr. goes hunting while Frank and Alexa check their traps and note the decreasing water levels. Unfortunately, none are successful with trying to get food. And when Stephen returns, Frank decides that he wants to go hunting, so he takes the bow and arrows, and Stephen tells him to try to stay cool because it's really hot out. And Frank is very determined to get some food for his teammates. And it's getting really hot, and Frank decides to come back, and unfortunately he doesn't feel well, and the medic is called because he may have sunstroke, but fortunately he doesn't have sunstroke, but he does have a bit of heat exhaustion, and he's told to rest and rehydrate after being cleared to continue. And that night he talks about how he's happy to be there still. Wes and Stephen Kelly go to the water source to check if there's anything in Wes's fish trap, but no dice. Wes talks about the danger is real, but he's not tapping. And they're worried about the croc in their pond and want to find a way to be able to try and catch fish without worrying about the croc. And they come up with the idea to try to build a dam to separate the croc from a section of the pond, so the croc can focus on the fish on their side of the pond while there's still some fish on Stephen and Wes's side of the pond that they could potentially catch. And they use roofing material, rocks, and branches to build their dam. And Wes is getting frustrated with the croc situation, but is determined to push through and complete the challenge. Joe checks his fish trap, but it's empty, and he decides to sit in his blind and hunt for the rest of the day, but hasn't seen any big game. The bull elephant returns, and he stares it down and hopes to intimidate him to get him to leave. And the elephant eventually does leave, and he sits in the blind, but doesn't see any animals, so he goes back to his shelter. And on his way back to his shelter, he spots a large snail, but he's unable to eat it because it's full of parasites. And that night, he mentions hearing hyenas off in the distance. Day 21, Waz and Teal pack up and head out to another water source. They travel through treacherous territory for many miles. Wes and Stephen do some fishing, and fortunately, Stephen does manage to catch one, and so they're able to get some food, some energy, and that's able to lift their spirits a little bit. And unfortunately, that's the last we see of those two for the episode, with the exception of a small vignette where Wes is sharpening the hooks that he has to make fishing easier. And Frank and Alexa do some fishing while Stephen hunts in the blind. Stephen spots an elephant at the water source and heads back to camp, and the three decide that they need to leave and go to another spot. Joe does some more hunting in the blind, and surprisingly, but not really surprisingly, Waz and Teal show up. And they don't see him at first because he's hiding behind the blind. And we see some subtitles and we hear Joe whispering about that being his watering hole. But I believe he said that earlier in the episode to the elephant that was near his watering hole. Plus, we don't really see his lips or mouth moving when we see the audio of "this is my watering hole" and stuff like that. So maybe they wanted to build some tension, but I don't think that Joe was staking a claim to the water source and didn't want them to be there at all. And so be nice, support your favorites, and don't send hate to any of the survivalists. Please stop being mean to Joe. And Joe reveals himself to Teal and Waz, and the three chat for a little bit, and Waz and Teal tell Joe that they want to camp out in the area for a few days, and Joe offers them a place to stay at his shelter. And then Waz and Teal share some of their meat with Joe, and that night they all settle down and fit comfortably in Joe's shelter. But Teal is a little worried with all the nocturnal animal activity that Joe had mentioned earlier. And day 22, as I said before, Wes works on some small fishing hooks and he and Steven go fishing. But this happens near the end of the episode. So we see a bit of them at the beginning of the episode and then not much until the end. But hopefully we can see more of what Wes and Steven do in the next two episodes. Steven, Alexa, and Frank pack up and migrate to another location. It looks like they're going to try to get to the same group of watering holes Waz and Teal want to get to, so maybe we'll see a big group merge soon. The group hikes many miles and Frank is struggling since he has a heavy pack and got heat exhaustion a few days ago that he might not have fully recovered from. And Frank really didn't want to leave stuff behind, so that's why his pack is so big. So don't try to say, oh, why isn't Steven carrying more things? Frank really wanted to carry all that stuff with him. And unfortunately, it's weighing him down and he's being affected by the heat. And if only they would have stayed in the shade more, but we don't really see them resting in the shade all that much. Maybe there wasn't a lot available, or that those parts where they were in the shade were cut out, but who knows. After a while, they make it to a water source and they're really excited, but then they spot hippos in the water, which is not great. And they all decide to go kind of closer to the water's edge than probably what is ideal, and they decide to move on, which is not fun. I hope they are able to find a water source soon that they can relax near. Teal is worried about all the nightly animal activity at Joe's camp. The group decides to go terrapin hunting. Joe tells them about the elephant encounter, and Waz and Teal are worried not only about the predators, but now that there is a bull elephant in the area. Once they get to the watering hole, Waz and Teal begin dredging with the mosquito net to try and get some terrapin. Joe helps clear the pond of the branches to help make things easier, and Waz and Teal successfully get 6 turtles, and they all have a feast. Later, Joe says he will eventually migrate once he is successful at hunting, and Waz and Teal may migrate without him because Waz and Teal want to leave the next day, and Joe seems kind of adamant about leaving and wants to have that success before moving on. And Waz and Teal do express that they want Joe to come with them, which is very nice. And they respect his decision to potentially stay at that location and don't want to force him to leave. So it seems that Joe may be on his own again. And the episode ends on a little cliffhanger on whether or not Joe will go with them, but we shall see. And that is the end of the episode. And I think that was a good episode. I'm interested to see what kind of merges will be happening. I'm interested in seeing Wes and Steven, and if they're successful with the fishing. I'm interested to see if Joe is successful with hunting. And as of day 22, Stephen Lee Hall Jr. has 294 days, only 6 more days until he has 300 days. Waz has 162 days. Wes has 118. Frank has 57, Alexa, Joe, Stephen, Kelly, and Teal have 43, and Joe has 32 days alone. Now, episode 7, Caged and Enraged. At the last water source, an abandoned cage may be the only viable shelter. Teal and Frank both score. Bo wins. A second crocodile has Wes on edge. So we shall see what happens, and I think it looks like we will have a merge between Stephen Lee Hall Jr., Frank, Alexa, Waz, Joe, and Teal. And then Stephen, Kelly, and Wes make their way there at another time. But we shall see. Thank you all so much for listening. Please like, comment nice things, and subscribe. And have a wonderful day. Okay, bye-bye.